but I think I'm going to get started
Yeah.
with, my idea is, for starters, that each of you, if you wish, can just say one sentence with the word patriarchy in it. It's whatever you want to say.
One sentence.
Yeah, you can think about it for a minute.
Yeah.
I mean, there's probably, you probably have whole paragraphs in your minds.
I have mine.
You have yours? Okay, let's hear it.
The patriarchy of the church in the history of all the churches on earth is caused by a love of dominion which is against the charity which is the essential of God.
Way to steal my sentence.
My patriarchal sentence would just be that I don't blame and get mad at people who are in the patriarchy system because it's just been in our culture for so long. I'm not mad at men. I'll just say that.
Yeah, and that's a good place for me to just say, my intention is not to demonize men, and it's not to engage in victim politics. All right, great. Got that covered.
Patriarchy, I have worked for the last 20 years to do my bit to develop a culture that is more egalitarian, and I hope I'm leading the seeds for what will not come to fruition in our lifetime, but hopefully in the next century. So I feel much like the women who worked for the right for women to vote.
Cool.
So I just keep putting seeds out, sowing seeds and talk about that.
Well, my thought is, as patriarchy dissolves little by little, which we're all observing, and at least at the beginning of it feels very dangerous to me.
It feels very dangerous, right?
May I ask a clarifying question?
Yes.
The patriarchy feels dangerous, or the
No, the
dissolution?
dissolution of the
The
patriarchy.
dissolution of patriarchy feels dangerous?
Yes.
Oh,
We'll
okay.
have to pursue that.
Well, yeah, let's
I resent my own buy-in to the patriarchy and all the things it created for me that were not positive. And I own my own buy-in.
You own your own.
Buy-in?
buy in.
I could have
Buy in.
said, I'm doing my own thing, but I didn't. I said, I acquiesced.
It was the
It's
culture
taken me a
back
long
then.
time to admit that.
Okay, well, we have until 3 o'clock, and I have a lot. I've tried to boil it down, and I have a lot to get through. I'm going to zoom through. And during the time that I'm presenting, you're welcome to ask clarifying questions and make short comments. And I'm planning to have a little time at the end for more discussion. So this is about outgrowing patriarchal influences. It's about how the patriarchy is so soaked into our culture that we are acting it out without even noticing it. So, and I just want to give a few examples of where I've encountered patriarchy where I didn't expect it, or where I've observed other people kind of tripping over patriarchal assumptions that I don't think they really intend to promote. So I'm starting with Thoreau's invisible support system. Does anybody know about Thoreau's invisible support system?
You
Yes.
told me about it.
I did, didn't I?
Which is, when his, or do you want to say it? I mean,
Well, if you know, just go ahead and say
well,
it.
I'll just say what I remember you telling me 10 years ago. Thoreau and his Walden, and yay, he went off to the woods and wrote all this beautiful stuff. Well, his wife and daughters, as I understand, were bringing him food, and they were feeding
Doing
him.
his laundry.
Doing his
Yes.
laundry, mending his
Yeah,
clothes.
okay, taking care of him whilst he wrote all this beautiful stuff.
Right.
Never mentioned.
Yeah, never mentioned.
Yeah.
Right. So here's what Martha This I found out from reading this book, Martha Beck's Breaking Point, Why Women Fall Apart and How They Can Recreate Their Lives. This is one of her early books, 1997, and I think she's trying to get people to forget she ever wrote it, because
Really?
it's never in lists of books that she wrote. I don't know why.
That's why she wants people to forget that she wrote it, or?
No, I don't know why. I don't know why. Anyway, here's what she says. She's talking about watching the effect of grinding, constant, mindless industrial labor on his fellow American men. Thoreau wrote that most of them, quote, live lives of quiet desperation, unquote, to prove that there was no need for men to be absorbed by the great machine of industry. Thoreau set out alone into the New England forest and built a small cabin at the edge of one Walden Pond. He lived there for a solid year. Walden is his diary from this time. It is full of poetic commentary about the simplicity of living in accord with nature and the ease with which Thoreau was able to meet all his own needs without having to give up all his time and energy to industry. And then she says how moved she was. And then she says, imagine my surprise when some years later I discovered that the, quote, ease and simplicity of Thoreau's life had a lot to do with the fact that his mother and sister had brought him in prepared food and taken away his laundry for washing and repair almost every day during the entire time he was at Walden. His neighbors in the Walden Pond vicinity were quoted as saying that poor old Henry would have starved to death in a week without the staunch support of his female relatives. Now, when I read that, I was pretty shocked. I had no idea about that. And so, what was interesting, what was even more interesting about that, well, first of all, I'll turn this around and say, think about the irony that Thoreau took a stand against slavery to the point of letting himself get thrown in jail for not paying his taxes. And yet, he was so complicit in the oppression of women, not actually acknowledging their work. And it's like, I don't know if he even noticed. He may not have even noticed. I think that he was on the level and he was trying to be honest. But so I was so excited by Breaking Point that I wrote a Theta Alpha Journal editorial about it probably in the early 2000s. And it was really interesting to see the response I got. One woman was very annoyed by what I had written, and she seemed to think that I was trying to make people feel sorry for women. It's like that wasn't the case. But then a minister who was currently the editor of New Church Life said, I think he actually wrote a letter and said, to the effect that women often they don't want to be acknowledged. They don't want the attention. They don't want, they just want to do their bit and not, have any of the limelight. And so I actually talked to him and I said, that might be true and it might not. But it's like, if Thoreau wanted to be honest, supposing Thoreau had phoned out for pizza every night and just not mentioned it, that wouldn't really be honest, would it? And that's basically what happened, except on a more homegrown scale.
And another aspect is the women were also complicit because they didn't talk to him when his book was being written to say, I'd like an acknowledgement.
Yeah, they didn't do that.
Yeah.
And and that was the culture.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Also,
And
the
we keep doing
simplicity,
that.
it seems sort of that he was, well, almost lying, but probably not intentionally, but
Yes.
to say the simplicity of being with nature, it wasn't simple for those women washing his clothes and cooking.
Lugging the food. They had to lug you know how thick that forest is? There was no donkey carrying the food. Those women were lugging his breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
So it wasn't simple. It wasn't
They
simple.
probably wove.
Mhm.
It wasn't simple at all. So why was he even saying the simplicity?
Right. So that is the question. We don't have
Well,
the answer to
It was
that.
simple for him.
Yeah, it was
He
exactly.
sat there and food appeared and clean clothes appeared.
That's kind
How
of.
simple can you get?
I would all like to live like that.
When you go camping when you actually go camping, well, we haven't even been camping because we go to the camp store, we go to the nearby, but it's not simple if you really go camping. And what if, when our family goes camping, what if we had to find our own food? I mean, what if we had to
Yeah, right.
find the berries and everything? I mean,
Yeah, roughing it isn't a picnic, you might say.
so, okay,
You know,
carry on.
one of the points of this book is that the life of the Enlightenment era scholar was propped up by the work of unpaid and unacknowledged other people, you know, women and lower class people and people of other races, and that women are supposed to be able to, now women are supposed to be able to join in with that life, but they're also supposed to still be back there supporting other people in doing it, and that's contradictory. You can't do it. But also the whole thing about not wanting to be acknowledged, and it's like, I don't think that's true of every woman. But that leads you to the idea that women shouldn't want to be acknowledged for their work. That if they do want to be acknowledged or compensated or whatever, but that's not very feminine of them. It's not very supportive of them. And so, like, they come in for censure for that. So I wanted
And
to.
it was interesting that he didn't say that men should have the same desire.
No, right. No, he didn't say that men should have the desire not to be compensated. I mean, if men are supporting families, they gotta get paid, right? Yeah. So that was an interesting sort of follow-up to that, Date Alpha Journal. And I wanted to read something from Date Alpha Journal back in the 70s. And well, I was going through my old Date Alpha Journals recently. I have a whole bunch of them. But, Vera Glenn wrote a wonderful thing in Date Alpha Journal back in 1976, I think it was. And I liked it so much that I put it in Excerpted Inspirations for Deborah's Tree. She was giving a speech about Date Alpha Journal then and now, and she said, as editor, she'd gotten a couple of letters that clarified the issues of editing Date Alpha Journal. And she said, my friend wrote that she had heard comments by ministers that some of the women who wrote for the journal misconstrued from their feminine logic what the writings really teach. They were distressed that such fallacies should be perpetrated by the leading women's magazine of the new church. My correspondent expressed herself as frustrated and disappointed because she couldn't be confident that the articles she read in the journal written by women contained the truth. She wondered if it would not be wise to have a minister pre-read the articles so that the readers would not absorb errors and confused ideas. This was back in the 70s. Can you believe it?
Yeah.
You know, when
Wow.
I edited the high school paper, the instructor vetted everything, and everything he didn't approve of, I ran down to the Mimeo machine because I was such a goody two-shoes. Nobody thought I was doing it, and printed out a paper called the Whiteout, because he used to take whiteout and scratch out anything he didn't like. And I just printed it all up and on the Mimeo machine and distributed it anonymously.
Oh, fun.
Wow.
Because it doesn't work for me to have women's voices silenced. And it was mostly the women's voices.
So anyway, Vera went on. Part of the process of maturing is first recognizing that teachers, parents, and even writers are fallible, and then that you are. Even ministers teaching and preaching from their special enlightenment cannot lay claim to the truth. The truth is the Lord's, it is in His Word, but it is read and understood by finite minds. How often we are urged to go to the Word for ourselves, because it is only the truth as we understand it that can make one with our lives. No sincere person deliberately wants to lead others into confusion and error. I feel that the women who write for the journal are sincere. As editor, I can make suggestions for improving the mechanics and the expression. I can tell the writer that her idea isn't clear or that I disagree with it, but I can't set myself up to correct her ideas. We want to encourage people to read the Word, reflect on it, and write and talk about their reflections. This would never happen under an aura of censorship. If an article has value, then the women of the church should be mature and intelligent enough to read and judge the material for themselves, remembering always that it represents another finite individual's understanding and opinion. Anyway, so she talks about how, let's write and let's be free to read and write and comment and all that. And I thought to myself, I'm so grateful to Vera for taking that particular stand. And what would have happened if she said, "Oh, what a great idea! I'm just going to go running to a minister with all these articles and make sure that they're the truth." She didn't do that. I think it would have, if she had, it probably wouldn't have totally derailed the development of Date Alpha Journal, but it would have delayed it. At that time, Date Alpha Journal was like it was evolving very quickly into the vital periodical that it later became. It was a transitional thing. So I just want to remind you that this is where we in the general church, I'm just talking to general people who were raised in the general church, this is where we come from. This is the legacy that we have.
Mm-hmm.
Women who were really so cowed by the whole general church power structure that they wondered if they should even express their views in writing.
I do have to say that, I mean, from reading Conjugal Love, I think the general church has, so partly come to this because there's numbers saying men are in a higher light than women.
Yep.
And so
Women are in a higher perception. We don't say that. Oh, women are in a higher perception. You better not talk in church because women are in a higher perception, and we know what you're saying is bull.
I just was sort of saying what, I mean, that's true. But I think,
But that whole
some ministers
time,
have focused on that, and that makes them.
I got told as a chemistry student, it was the first year they let women take chemistry. There
Wow,
were 4 of
first.
us in the class, and the instructor said we were taking up spaces with our bottoms, he didn't say bottoms, that men should have, because it was men who would need to be supporting family Sundays. So they were the ones who should be taking the hard sciences and, the higher education and yada yada. Blither blither. And I said, who do you think uses all the you guys are making? I need to know if you're poisoning me or not.
You said that. Good for you.
Well, I take after my mother,
Yeah.
and we know who she was. Or what I think of her character. Anyway, it's come in handy.
Right.
But he really struggled with that. Later years, I asked him for an apology, and he first didn't remember that he said that. And then the next time, 10 years later, because I asked him every 10 years, and he decided to give up asking, he said, well, if I did say that, that was wrong. Which I thought was, that's why you're
At
still
least-
married.
Yeah.
Because
It's so funny how people conveniently forget what they said. Yep.
But the other thing I did was get the top mark in the class because I was so at him for saying that. I have a photographic
Right.
memory. Back when I was being educated, all you had to do was vomit it all back up on the test.
It's funny how I'm only a few years younger than you are,
To do.
and I didn't get that at all.
Well, you were lucky.
I was.
Maybe he had progressed in that 10 years.
I think
I
you
didn't-
have.
I didn't take chemistry in high school.
Oh,
He-
okay. Well, there
That
you go.
teacher taught my children, who are women, and was very different. I don't know. So I think my mother said maybe he was just so new and so scared, because as a convert, she was new and scared. She thought she could not ever use birth control because if someone in the new church found out, they'd throw her out.
Oh, that's a whole nother topic,
Yes.
which we're not going to get into today.
Yeah.
Okay.
But,
Mhm.
maybe he was trying to toe the new church line and didn't understand where it really was.
Yeah.
Who knows?
So I want to talk a little bit about what we mean when we say patriarchy. And I want to add that this talk that I'm giving is a very personal journey of associated ideas. It's not like authoritative or definitive or telling anybody what to think. This is just what I've observed and the ideas that have come and smacked me in the face, basically. So I have this thing, white Western patriarchy. That's the kind of patriarchy that we're generally dealing with. Male-dominated power structures, hierarchy, ranking by worth and importance. Western patriarchy is pretty much obsessed with hierarchy. It's like, well, We got to know who's on the top and who's on the bottom. And I use the words worth and importance because I think they're two different things. Like, you could be important or less important. Worth is more to do with morals. Like, do you deserve to have, do you deserve your rank in the system? And Dewey came up with a really interesting thought in home church a few weeks ago. He says hierarchy is reality projected on a one-dimensional axis. We were talking about whether hierarchy is a real thing or is it just an artifact of human thinking. I'm like, there are arguments on both sides of that. So, and I just wanted to, the next thing I want to do is I came across this wonderful letter in a newsletter called What's Growing On. My parents, Paul and Beryl Simonetti, were very involved in something called the psychosynthesis community. And they took the course, and Dad edited the newsletter, and they did a lot of organization for it. And it's a school of thought that combines psychology and spirituality with some strong Jungian influences. Anyway, they had Robert Moore come and talk at the Pinebrook Center, and this was a huge coup. Robert Moore was talking about, he had written a book with another person named Douglas Gillette called King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, about the male archetypes. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But anyway, a woman wrote a letter after she had been to the event. And she wrote, "This morning, Mother's Day, I was sitting on the edge of the bathtub, waiting for the gray to be sufficiently colored."
Waiting for the...
The gray, her hair. She's dyeing her hair.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, and blow drying my new painted bright red toenails while reading Robert Moore's book. Isn't that beautiful imagery? I don't waste much time. Here's what I read. The patriarchal male does not welcome the full masculine development of his sons or his male subordinates any more than he welcomes the full development of his daughter or his female employees. This is the story of the superior at the office who can't stand it that we are as good as we are. How often are we envied, hated, and attacked in direct and passive-aggressive ways, even as we seek to unfold who we really are in all our beauty, maturity, creativity, and generativity. The more beautiful, competent, and creative we become, the more we seem to invite the hostility of our superiors, or even of our peers. What we are really being attacked by is the immaturity in human beings, who are terrified of our advances on the road toward masculine or feminine fullness of being. This is from the introduction to Robert Moore's book. And then she says, that paragraph for me was like a school bus with 50 kids flashing peace signs on the expressway. I desperately needed that. It let me know that I'm not imagining the hostility I encounter. I am not paranoid. What I perceive is real. It is there, all the envy and hatred. It tells me something about myself that I didn't fully realize until I read it. I almost fell into the tub. If I get nothing more from that book, which I very much doubt will be the case, that one paragraph is enough. I still do not know how to handle this hostility and envy. I assume it will always wound. What I know is that I must create. I must use the creativity, competence, and intelligence that I was born with, or I will self-destruct. I will die. Being ordinary and fitting in will kill me. Not doing what I do well, which is a great deal, will kill me. The envy, hatred, and attacks will hurt me, but they will not kill me. Cry my tears and keep moving. So that's important. The reaction of this woman to what she read was important. What's also important is that in this book, King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, Robert Moore and his co-writer talk about how the problem isn't that men are too masculine. The problem is that they're not masculine enough.
Yes.
That this is, where is it? Oh yeah, here we are. Patriarchal behavior is an expression of boy psychology, or the immature male. It's insecure, it's fearful, but that men have the capacity to grow into mature males. Mature, they can be mature, masculine people, fully developed. They can be mentors, they can be elders. They can they can be generative. That's one of his favorite words. And so it's like, the problem isn't that men are men. The problem is that they're boys and haven't become men yet.
Right.
And that gives hope to all of us, that there is something for men to grow up to and for women to grow up to.
You're here. That's a good point.
Yeah, I thought that was really important. Then I just want to touch on that briefly, but also Ken Wilber wrote a wonderful book called A Brief History of Everything, and it gives some useful historical context for patriarchy. It's like, oh, patriarchy didn't happen because men are picky and women are sheepy. It happened because of various cultural conditions that made it necessary or desirable for men to protect women, especially women who are childbearing. Pregnant, childbearing, and nursing women sometimes need to be protected. And that includes things like women not riding horses because it can raise their rate of miscarriage, that kind of thing. So he writes about different kinds of farming, where females work the field with a hoe, God is a woman. Where males work the field with a plow, God is a man. So it has to do with how food is provided. And I don't have time to go into that. It's just something I want to just throw out there.
I think to amplify on that point just a bit, another book where Ken Wilber's book has obviously meant a lot to you.
Yes.
A book that's meant a lot to me is Eve's Seed.
Eve's Seed.
And I can't remember, it's a historian from Mississippi, wrote it in the Mail. And it goes through all of the prehistoric era, which he calls the gathering hunting stage,
Mm-hmm.
not the hunting gathering stage.
Oh, the gathering hunting. So gathering is war.
Right.
Because they did,
There was a lot more gathering than hunting.
75% or more was gathering that both men and women did.
Mm-hmm.
And the hunting was 25%, which most of the men did.
Yeah.
So they were, in other words, it was much more egalitarian. That changed when women were the ones who were responsible for herbs, finding herbs and beginning to grow herbs and things that they discovered would help various ailments. So then that led to the beginning of the agricultural age. So that was the big change from a gathering hunter to the agricultural stage. And at that point, during the gathering hunter stage, most women that's when you had goddesses, and because men and women did not know where birth came from.
Yes, right.
But in the agricultural stage, when they began to stay in areas and domesticate animals, then they learned that the sheep and cows were inseminated by the male, and so therefore that became important. And the females were just the earth that grew it.
Just the earth, what?
That the seed grew it.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, right. The earth that grew it, right?
Yeah, the earth that it grew, yeah.
So that really started the whole, so this has been going on for millennia, since the agricultural age, this whole approach. And the book points out that dissemination is dissemination of semen.
Dissemination of what?
Of semen.
Semen, right.
Yeah.
So I don't use that term anymore. When somebody talks about dissemination of this, I'll say, distribution. Or there's another word that comes from seminal work. I don't use that word.
You don't use that word? Oh, okay.
I use pivotal.
Patriarchy. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So it just shows you how embedded and ended up with this in like the 1950s and so forth, with men being so angry that this is what we're going through now, at the change when their strength and brawn is not as important. And so what do they do now? So they're angry. And so all that's getting even worse. So that book
They
has
were
been a lot to me.
emasculated before the feminine movement. they had lost the true masculinity long before the feminine movement, the current feminine movement.
Yes, it's right, it's not the feminists.
Some of them.
So,
So, when did that happen then, that they had,
This
I think it's
oh yeah, the thing is, I don't know, I'm not coming at this really from a historical perspective, but I think the roots go way back.
Right.
Like
And that's what I said.
Christianity, whatever. Anyway, so here's what I noticed when I was working on this workshop, that when I put on my patriarchy goggles, everything looks like patriarchy. Actually, everything smells like patriarchy. And there's no smell goggles you can put on, I guess. But yeah, and also, when you have a patriarchy hammer in your hand, everything looks like a patriarchy nail. Or it smells like a patriarchy
Right.
nail. So there are plenty of kinds of prejudice and kinds of oppression that also come from patriarchy, especially white Western patriarchy, and are associated with it. And when we look at them, we can get insight into the oppression of women. Because, sexism and patriarchy aren't the same thing, although I can't think of an example of sexism that isn't patriarchal. But I think there are parts of patriarchy that aren't necessarily sexist. Instead, they're racist, or classist, or casteist, or ableist, or ageist, or anti-LGBTQ plus. And then on the other side, I have the more cultural, organizational things: nationalism, colonialism, imperialism, capitalism, different kinds of capitalism, eugenics, religious and secular bias, and militarism. And they, all of them, more or less, come down to some form of exceptionalism. American exceptionalism, Christian exceptionalism, and that kind of thing. And I put down here that capitalism and eugenics are both forms of social Darwinism. Now, I don't know how familiar you are with the term social Darwinism, but it's about survival of the fittest as a Darwinian concept about how the whole biosphere came to be by survival of the fittest. And some people, not Darwin, but some people wanted to use this idea to organize society. Like, survival of the fittest is good for society, so we should let the fit survive and not help the unfit survive. We should just let them die out if that's what they're going to do.
Wow.
Don't
And that was, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, you'll have to tell me about eugenics.
Yeah, eugenics. Eugenics is the name of a movement that was like 100 years ago. Eugenics was a big deal, and it had to do with race, and it had to do with ability, and it's like, it was very important for,
It's breeding people.
yes, it's breeding people.
Sterilize children with mental disabilities.
Yeah, right.
or
Yes.
any disability.
At age 10.
Oh, wow.
Or in,
Just
just
routinely.
recently in our lifetime, sterilizing women in prison.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Women in.
Prison.
Oh,
Right. So if people
Sterilize
have
all the
criminal
prostitutes.
tendencies, they should be sterilized. If people have like genetic disorders, they should be sterilized, or they should reproduce.
They did
But it's
have
also
it.
breeding people. They had, like, in the Nazi youth, where they would mix the two blonde-haired, blue-eyed people to breed the super race.
Right.
Yeah.
they did
The
that?
area.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
And-
another aspect of the Nazis that isn't quite as well known is that they were actually doing eugenics, killing children who had disabilities.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That is the
No.
most awful
Well, and
thing.
it used to be, if you were so nearly blind that you couldn't function in your own home, which I was, not nearsighted, I have cataract lenses implants now and I can see.
Yeah.
But I would never have been married. I wouldn't have bred because no one would marry someone who couldn't even find her way across the kitchen without tripping on something because she couldn't see.
Mhm.
And after we solved that problem, suddenly everybody's wearing glasses.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yep. That's what happened.
Well, that's what Heaven
And we're
Keller
breeding.
went through.
What's what?
Helen Keller went through that.
Oh, yeah.
She had a man who wanted to marry her, and she was pressured by the family and the society not to marry, and she was bereft.
But she was only deaf and blind because she had scarlet fever.
Right, so there was
That
nothing wrong with her
genetic.
inheritance.
But
So
they
in
didn't
the-
know
yeah.
genetics.
In the
Let's
book
get
that
on.
David Deaton wrote, he said that her parents thought she wouldn't be able to look after a baby. She
Yeah,
had-
right, it's
And
more
he
of a-
got scared off the property with a rifle, is what David Deaton said.
Oh, wow, yeah, I know a little bit about that.
Okay,
But of course,
so it wasn't
back
about
then, when Helen
procreating,
Keller was
it
young,
about care.
people didn't quite understand as much about genetics as they do
Yeah.
today, too. That was a long time ago.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, so eugenics.
Thank you for explaining.
Yes, right, and so all this stuff, when you look at all this stuff and relate it to patriarchy, Irene was telling me, well, that's intersectional feminism. That's like feminism in relation to race rights, class rights, disability rights, and LGBTQ rights. Like, they go together. So, oh yes, and about that, I wanted to talk a little bit about religious and secular patriarchy. Now, a lot of the patriarchy that we experience today has its roots, at least somewhat, in Christian church. A male God, an all-male priesthood, male leadership, the wife being subject to her husband, and all that. And so, when the Enlightenment came around and people started being safe to be an atheist, people would say, well, we could get rid of all that oppression with atheism. And it's like, that's not the way it worked out, somehow. Somehow, the atheist community today can be just as patriarchal as the religious community. It's like, you would think that they would be in favor of progressive values like women's rights, race rights, and all that, but it's still an old boys club. It's like the scientific community was until recently, very male dominated. So the problem wasn't, and people would say, well, they're atheists, what do you expect? They're morally bankrupt. But that's not really the problem. And of course, the atheists are saying that people of faith are intellectually bankrupt, and that belief is a failure of rationality.
Mm-hmm.
They can be pretty darn smug about that.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but what it is they haven't gone to the psychological roots
Mm-hmm.
of patriarchy. They're still immature males. They still have boy psychology. Atheism hasn't per se helped them to mature as men. Like, so I just wanted to make sure. And then I wanted to add, Jamie was supposed to be here, and she wanted to hear about medical paternalism. I'm using the word paternalism here to mean father knows best. Like, religion knows best. You should believe what we say. Science knows best. You should believe what we say. Well, doctors know best, and you should believe what we say. And if you don't do what your doctor tells you, then you're a disobedient child. And that's huge. Yeah.
If I had been, my marriage to Michael was a long process of me refraining from using words that offended him.
Uh-huh.
And so I stopped being as forceful as I can be.
You stopped being what?
As forceful
As forceful.
as I can be, because
Uh-huh.
it made him flinch. He was raised to that, or darn is just a code word for d. You shouldn't even say darn.
Oh yeah, that was an
It
Odhner
was
thing.
I know.
Mhm.
It drove me crazy because I say d all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I stopped.
Mm-hmm.
And if I had been the cast iron that I was raised to be or had a model for, and my mom, on behalf of her children and her husband, he might still be alive. Every
Oh.
doctor we went to for 2.5 months said, oh, it's probably just a virus, everybody's getting viral infections now. And they would not look at his heart valve, which was massively infected and blowing germs to his whole body.
I heard a little
By the time
about that.
they finally looked at his heart valve, which was an artificial heart valve, and grew a biofilm in the 2 years it had been in him, and became massively bacterially infected. We even went to an ER, and the doctor there said, and this was 2 months in, or 2.5 months in, oh, it's probably just a virus. And they said, what about doing a transesophageal echocardiogram and find out if his heart valve is infected?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, oh, that's rare, which it isn't, as it happens.
But
And
did he
send
know
us
he had
home.
an artificial heart valve?
Because I told him.
You told him, right?
But I
The doctor
did not
that it was-
stomp my feet and swear at him and insist and threaten to sue him and tell him to go to hell and, all the,
Yeah, cast iron talk.
yeah. And the 2 days later, he was in the hospital, and 3 weeks later, he was dead.
Yeah, and it just makes you so mad.
And if I had, and I know if God wanted him, he would have run over him with a bus instead. But apparently God wanted him.
Mhm.
But it's still hard on me.
Because you can see how it might have been prevented so easily. Yeah.
It's so easy to, even when you're trying to do well, and I respect it. And I do respect how polite Michael always was in his language.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned a lot about, it helped me in my profession to learn from him that way. But it also,
Yep, so you've experienced it firsthand and you're still experiencing that. So you know what, guys? I'm going to just go right up until 3 o'clock because we're doing the discussion as we go.
Yeah.
So, so I came across this phrase, mythologizing Western culture, when I was watching a video that my daughter Sylvia recommended by, it's a YouTube channel called Come Together Council. And some of the, I haven't watched very many of the videos yet, but the person who was narrating the video that I watched, their name is, it's called Come Together Counseling. That's the name of the that's the name of the channel. And the narrator is named Renya Neo Norton, I believe. And that person is non-binary. And they were talking about, various things related to patriarchy and racism and all that other stuff. They used the term mythologizing Western culture. And that just went ding, ding, ding in my mind. That is what we do, isn't it? Like Western culture is just the cat's pajamas. It's the center of the universe, and we should measure everything else by it. And you know what? I love Western culture. Nobody loves the Western canon more than I do. I love Western science. I love Western art, music, literature. But that doesn't mean it's the be-all and end-all of life. But the way it's used, the way Western culture is like idealized, deified, it morally justifies all these things that I was talking about in this card. The racism, sexism, classism, and all that. It's like subjugation is morally justified, and therefore we had crusades, inquisitions, missionary work. Like in the 19th century, the Victorians were obsessed with missionaries going off to India and Africa to spread the gospel, and they did it in a very heavy-handed way.
and Hawaii.
Evangelism, right? Coercion, enslavement, exploitation. And it's like, all these things are for people's own good. Because Western civilization is so awesome, and Western Christianity is so awesome, that they should thank us for walking all over them. You know?
The big thing is the whole manifest destiny.
Yeah, manifest
which-
destiny,
which
that's the word.
Which was papally directed.
Yep.
So it's a
Yeah.
very
It's
top
obvious.
of
This is the way it's
the
gonna be.
Catholic Church.
Yeah, they had to save these people from hell.
So I cut out an article and a letter from the Philadelphia Inquirer, which I think is a terrific paper. And the letter was talking about Florida education, about slavery, which some of you are probably familiar with what's going on down there, but about how they want to say that slavery taught taught slaves skills that would benefit them later in life and all that sort of thing. Anyway, this letter writer said, Africa and its people, long before a white person set foot on the continent, had a fully functioning assortment of societies with complex language and belief systems, social structures, and institutions.
And blacksmiths.
Oh yeah, well later on it's like, oh, let's see. They were also botanists, textile experts, sculptors, musicians, dancers, orators, ironworkers, educators, and belief leaders who ultimately helped to build and shape what is now America. So it's like, people want to say, oh, our culture did good to the slaves. Well, actually, they did more for us than we did for them.
Wow.
Let's not forget that. But also that Africans absorbed the idea that their culture was worthless in comparison with Western culture. And that's just so sad. And that's what this is about, mythologizing Western culture. And the related idea of idealizing the past. Everything was so great back then when people were being enslaved and oppressed. And then I also cut out this article about textbooks, about how it's really hard for people to write textbooks without running afoul of various laws about what you're allowed to say and not allowed to say in textbooks. Like it says here, conservative analysts contend that the scrutiny of educational materials such as textbooks, is a much needed corrective to the liberal views that have come to shape instructional texts over the past few decades, mandating that such books be politically correct or overly focused on the views and feelings of historically disenfranchised groups to the exclusion of other parts of history. And some argue measures like the Texas and Tennessee laws are necessary to eradicate a rash of inappropriate books. We wouldn't allow a paint vendor to sell lead paint to be used in the classroom. Yeah, they're talking about poisoning the minds of young people. And that's what it looks like to some people. And then later on in the article, it says, there was a guy who was talking about the textbooks, and he says, books nowadays incorporate more quote-unquote minority groups, women, African Americans, Indian and Native Americans, all of whom were really on the periphery. The periphery of what, guys?
All the women?
Yeah, I don't know about women, but if we can push those women out to the periphery, all the better. But I think that's true, that women are on the periphery of recorded history.
Yes.
Even though you can't get...
Well, like the women who guided the early rockets in NASA.
Oh yeah, and the movie
Who were black.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
the
And
Hidden
that
Figures
movie,
ladies.
That wonderful movie.
And wonderful
Right.
movie. Yep, I
Yeah.
loved it.
Yeah.
Read the book too.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So,
yeah.
so they were used, I mean, by saying they were on the periphery, they mean they were on the periphery, so they shouldn't be discussed in textbooks.
Because they're
Because
not
the
Right,
main
it's like,
screen
because
is
the more time you spend on these, the less time you have for the important stuff, the Western canon.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that there's a
The
book.
Western canon that neglects the Mexicans who were incorporated into the U.S.
Right, it's like
who were there already.
right.
Yeah.
There were people whose ancestors were driven out of what's now the Southwestern United States. And we're saying, oh, they shouldn't be allowed in here because they're immigrants. Well, they lived here. Their ancestors lived here in this country.
Yeah.
Right.
I
So-
like the Native American poster where he's saying, oh, you don't like people coming in and taking your place?
Yeah, funny about that.
I didn't think about it.
I've been picking up books about education, and this one's called The Feel-Good Curriculum, The Dumbing Down of America's Kids in the Name of Self-Esteem. And this was published in 2000, which was probably the, the peak of the self-esteem backlash. And it's got some really shocking things about the Western canon and how important it is, which I'll get to if there's time. But, and then of course this book, Incognito, The Secret Lives of the Brain, is one of those scientifically paternalist books, like, oh, it's science, so you should believe it. Even though he talks about how we can't trust our senses because our brains do such strange things. But it's like, but you should still believe what we say, because it's science. So
So, I mean, what's his point in the book?
His point in the book, that book? Well, that's the thing, it was he kind of snuck up on saying, we should be conditioning people to not commit crimes. It's a very, I don't know what you call it. It's
Patriarchal.
well, it's very patriarchal in many ways, but it's, I'm just glad, I looked up this guy, David Eagleman, to see if he had kids of his own, because the way he talked about treating kids was shocking to me, just shocking. And I might get back to that, but
I wonder how much, though, when we talk about patriarchy, we're actually talking about capitalism.
about what?
Capitalism.
Yes,
Oh, they're
well,
all
that's
connected.
one of the
They
things
are
we've got here. Capitalism. Sylvia, my daughter, was saying, capitalism is the new patriarchy. It's what people are blaming everything on now. And it's like, but isn't capitalism a patriarchal phenomenon?
I don't understand that, but I'm not denying it at all. But I
Right.
just don't understand how capitalism is patriarchy. And educate
Well,
me, please. I'm not arguing.
In its authentic form, it is not.
Right.
And it's what?
But in the
In its
form it
authentic
has
form.
evolved in our time, it's really not capitalism. It's oligarchy.
Mm-hmm. Oh, right, what we have today
Right.
isn't really. Yeah, well, the
Oh,
thing
you
is,
mean because men kind of run the business world? Is that what you mean? And
No,
therefore
no, but I think those things like conquest, commerce, affluence, and consumerism is capitalism.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Right. Well, and capitalism, as I put it down here, is a form of social Darwinism. It is an economic form of social Darwinism. It is the survival of the economically fittest. If you can make money, then you succeed. If you can't,
Okay, that depends on, again, I'll say the basic thing of capitalism would not be that.
Right.
right,
What you're describing is what is becoming known as rampant capitalism.
rampant.
Right.
Melanie
Out
calls
of
it
control.
unfettered
Where it
capitalism.
just means,
I was
you know,
calling it
you don't-
unregulated.
Start
Go
out
for
that
the
way.
goal.
whatever you can do to make money in the next 3 months for the next board, is look at us.
And that's really since the 70s.
Yeah,
Wasn't
and no
that
matter
way
what it does to
before?
the
Reagan-
planets or the
Reagan-
animals or the,
Yeah, Reagan brought that in, which
Mhm.
is different from capitalism in like, it's either Norway or Sweden, there's a whole different word, it's called Näringsliv. It's for capitalism, which means it's business for good. So, I mean, their word for business is embedded with business for good.
Mm-hmm. Ah,
And
that's the
we
thing.
don't have that.
I have a quote
I
from
agree.
Dorothy Canfield about business as service. But so I just have to set it up. I have to set it up with this. Anyway, we read a book called Who Do We Choose to Be by Margaret Wheatley. And the subtitle is Facing Reality, Claiming Leadership, Restoring Sanity. I'm like, that sounds good. And I found some interesting ideas in the book. And what disturbed me probably the most was how Wheatley used John Glubb's 6 stages of civilization as a template, kind of a template for the whole book. And it's like, and the last stage is the stage of decadence. And when I was talking about this to my parents and Mal said, start with decadence, and then people will understand what leads up to.
Right.
Right. So what John, there's a guy named Sir John Glubb who came up with these 6 stages. He's a historian. So the age of decadence he describes this way: wealth and power have led to petty and negative behaviors, including narcissism, consumerism, materialism, nihilism, fanaticism, and high levels of frivolity. A celebrity culture worships athletes, actors, and singers. The masses are distracted by entertainment and sporting events, abandon moral restraint, shirk duties, and insist on entitlements. The leaders believe they are impervious and will govern forever. This age also develops the welfare state, as imperial leaders generously build universities and hospitals, give grants to university students, support the young and the poor, and extend citizenship to everyone. When they run out of money, all this benevolence disappears, and these institutions shut their doors. Yeah, and then there's a footnote on page 61 that sort of enlarges on that. It says, within the last stages of collapse, the age of decadence, human rights, social justice, gender equality, education, and healthcare benefits all surge ahead as leaders create the welfare state. The leaders, acting as if they'll always be in power with unlimited resources, are hugely beneficent in offering a progressive society to all. So it appears that justice and social good are moving forward, which they are in the context of the moment and the past few years of the civilization. However, the tragic irony is that all this progress in human rights occurs at the end of the civilization and cannot be sustained because of all the other forces at play. The arc of justice seems to surge, but is actually a sign of imminent collapse. Such a harsh truth to contemplate. And you know, when I read that, I felt insulted on behalf of women and behalf of races who have waited a long time for justice, as if that was some extra fancy luxury that had to be propped up by a welfare state. And when my dad was in this group, and he said, it makes me want to turn in my belly button and resign from the human race. Because it's so discouraging. Anyway, so I'll just tell you a little bit about the other stages. The age of pioneers. Fearless, courageous, and without constraint. Invaders surprise the dominant civilization with their attacks. Strong virtues of shared purpose, honor, and a strict moral code bind them. 2. The age of conquest. Using more sophisticated and disciplined military actions. Learn from the civilization they are conquering. They take control. Here we are. Often there is a strong religious imperative to their conquest. They are doing their God's work. That's what I'm talking about.
Back to the manifesto.
It's the mythologizing of Western culture justifies all this stuff. It sounds like, oh, they're invading, they're stealing, they're pillaging, they're conquering, and this is good.
They're just nation building.
Yes,
Right.
it's nation building, right?
And Christianity to
Yeah.
everyone
Then-
who survives their imposition.
Then the middle stages, the age of commerce and the age of affluence. With a strong military to protect the frontiers, explorers embark on the search for wealth creation, seeking new enterprises as far as they can reach. Values of glory and honor give way to values of profit and personal wealth. The age of affluence, service ethics disappear and selfishness takes over. Education shifts from learning to obtaining qualifications for high-paying jobs. The young and ambitious seek wealth, not honor or service. So you can see that there's a perceived downward slant to morality. It's like they're gradually degrading. The morality of these ages is degrading. Like it gets worse and worse. And then 5 is the age of intellect. The arts and knowledge flourish in the midst of decline. Intellectuals are prevalent and engage in incessant talking as a substitute for action. The belief takes hold that problems can be solved by mental cleverness rather than selfless service and courage. In other words, diplomacy? Civil conflict increases even as the empire is under dire threat. Instead of binding together to preserve the nation, internal political factions seek to destroy one another. So,
In the book, we looked at what Love does, an analysis of stages of civilizations and how they've gone through them, like the Chinese civilization, the Egyptian civilization.
Oh,
he says that this is-
applies these to.
Yeah.
yes, he's
Okay.
studied
That's
lots
where
of different civilizations, and he's come to this template that fits all of them. Like all civilizations are destined to go through this, and it's like I see that the pattern may be valid, but I feel like the moral interpretation he puts on it is maybe questionable. And I just on Tuesday morning I was out walking, and I came up with a phrase: the ill-fare state.
Instead of the welfare.
Like he talks about the like all this social justice stuff has to be propped up by the welfare state, and isn't that decadent? And I'm like, wait a minute. The traditional patriarchal values of like invasion, conquest, commerce, etc., they're all propped up by what I call the ill-fare state. which is the exploitation of people, groups of people who are specifically singled out not to benefit from the creation of wealth. So there's got to be at least one form of like lower class, like subjugated class, in order to prop up those values. And it's like,
Like the Hispanic people right now.
Well, or Native Hawaiians,
Undocumented.
Yeah.
Native-
somebody gotta mow the lawn, somebody gotta make the hotel bed.
right.
But
So, yes.
I'm reading, this year, I'm reading a book club on undocumented, or immigrants. And we just finished one on undocumented that showed that after Katrina, after hurricanes, after 9/11, it was primarily the undocumented who worked, because they needed the work.
Mm-hmm.
So they worked under these horrendous conditions and
Yeah.
became ill, and nothing's done for them because they're undocumented.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, well-
it's really like the U.S., one of the conclusions is the U.S. uses up undocumented and then throws them.
Right.
We still have a slavery class.
Yes, we still do. It's like, yes, we
Oh,
haven't.
yeah.
We just don't call it.
Yes, and so I feel like the
Yeah.
decadence that we're experiencing right now, and I agree with Wheatley that we're experiencing decadence, it's not because we've lost sight of these morally elevated ideas of sacrifice and courage and invasion and conquest. It's because we haven't dealt with the wrongs that have been committed. And also that Margaret Wheatley says that the raised standard of living leads to materialism. Well, I think that the raised standard of materialism, the raised standard of living leads to materialism because it's at the expense of people who don't benefit.
Yeah.
Is that who wrote this book when you say Margaret Wheatley?
Margaret Wheatley
Oh,
wrote this
she's
book,
the author. Okay.
Who Do We Choose to Be?
Yeah, I mean, it goes very along with what it says about wealth in the Third Testament. It says very clearly that there's nothing wrong with being wealthy,
Right.
as long as you are useful to your fellow people. As long
Yes,
as
right.
you take care of other people,
With
serve
it.
the neighbor, do
Right.
good things with that wealth, it's fine. But
Right. And
wealth on its own is evil.
right, but well, yeah, or the love of wealth on its own
Yeah,
is evil. But
right.
also, like, it's great to be a philanthropist and pat yourself on the back. But if you're, in order to be a philanthropist, you're oppressing people and making it necessary for people to accept your philanthropy. Then
No,
it's
well,
not
that's
good.
not
It's
the
like,
same thing.
little
It's
business.
their
it's a
own.
little bit like, oh, look how good we're being to these poor oppressed people.
Well, that's
Make
not
money
true
on it.
philanthropy then.
But you know what, your list makes me think of the first time I read my way through the Old and New Testament.
Which list is it? Is it this one?
Yeah.
Or, uh-huh.
Pioneer
the
down to
decadent.
decadent. I was, when we moved to Bernathen, I was a second grader and I was 7 years old. And my teacher told me I was too young to be in her class, but I'd already done first grade, so she had to take me. I started reading through the Word because it seemed that was a very important book to all the people around me.
Mm-hmm.
And I had already read my grandmother's complete works of Shakespeare, so the language was familiar. It was the Old King James, and I thought, well, then I'll read this other important book. And all the cultures went down.
Mm-hmm.
All the people who started out good became evil. It was the most depressing thing. And I thought, well, can any church survive?
Mm-hmm.
Can any movement survive?
Yeah.
They all start out with these ideals and these wonderful prospects and this great thing they're doing, and they all go to hell.
Mm-hmm. Well, and is there any
And
way
they-
to build a nation without stomping on another one?
Well, and King David was a creep, and they glorified him.
I know.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, I really thought, what do these people think is going to happen to their church with all these examples of you?
Yes. Well, it seems that institutionalizing something often leads to corruption.
Yeah,
It's like you turn something into an institution, it gets corrupted.
yeah,
That's just what happens.
yeah.
It's like so sad when you think about it. It's like, can't we figure out a way to create a sustainable?
As a culture, we're supposed to be regenerating,
Mm-hmm.
not hitting the ground.
Yeah. Well, anyway, when I was thinking about this, I was also thinking about a passage that I read in Dorothy Canfield Fisher's The Brimming Cup. Now, Dorothy Canfield Fisher is my favorite novelist. She was born in 1879, and she wrote novels in the early 20th century.
Give us some other titles, because I know.
The Bent Twig, The Deepening Stream, Seasoned Timber, Rough Hewn, The Homemaker. Homemaker is a wonderful book. It's about a family that started to thrive when the wife went to employment and the husband stayed home and watched the kids. Anyway, so in her story, The Brimming Cup, there's a young man named Neil Crittenden. Well, he's not so young anymore. I guess he's in his 30s. But he's talking to someone who wants to know about his philosophy of business. He has a philosophy of business as service. He says, but after all, wood is something that people have to have, isn't it? Somebody has to get it out and work it up into usable shape. If he can do this, get it out of the woods without spoiling the future of the forests. This was published in 1919, you guys. Drying up the rivers and all that, and have it transformed into some finished product that people need in their lives. It's a sort of plain everyday service, isn't it? And to do this work as economically as it can be managed, taking as low a price as you can get along with, instead of screwing as high a price as possible out of the people who have to have it. What's the matter with that? That's an interesting problem in ingenuity. I tell you, you ought to talk to my wife about this. It's as much her idea as mine. We worked it out together little by little. Wonderful story. And then he says, it's absurd to think that businessmen can only find their opportunity for service to their fellow men by such haphazard contracts with public service as helping raise money for a library or heading a movement for better housing for the poor, when they don't know anything about housing for the poor nor what it ought to be. Their opportunity for public service is right in their own legitimate businesses. And don't you forget it. Everybody's business is his best way to public service. And doing it that way, you'd put out of operation the professional uplifters who uplift as a business and can't help being priggish and self-conscious about it. And it's like, this idea of business and service came up in several of Dorothy Canfield's books. You know, she was a bit of a hobby horse that she had. It's like the idea that the very fabric of society can be consciously used as a way of benefiting people. And it doesn't seem like such a terribly weird, it doesn't seem like a weird idea to me. It's like he's saying, people have, Neil Crittenden is saying, all these businessmen are using their ingenuity to get on top of the other guy and to raise their prices as high as they'll go and pay their workers as little as they can get away with. And Neil Crittenden is saying, wait a minute, we could have a different goal for business. It doesn't have to be that kind of competition. It can be a different kind of competition to see how well we can treat people in business.
The Hawaiians say, don't be the crab in the bucket.
What's that?
Don't be the crab in the bucket.
Yes,
the
right.
Crabs climb over each other to get out of the bucket.
Yeah. So like there are people who have visions about this. I mean, it's like,
Well, and now there finally is a legal process in the U.S. for a B corporation.
right.
Where you have a legal entity that has two purposes. One is a business and the other is some type of nonprofit activity that they're doing.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very nice.
But it's about
Charge too much for what you housing. People are
Oh,
charging
housing.
exorbitant amounts.
Yes, well, and he's saying nobody would be willing to charge people too much for medical care because that would be so, the innocence of youth. And it's like now medical care is what's bankrupting people almost more than, housing, medical care, those are, I think, the biggies.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, and education is the rising cost
Oh,
of
yes.
an education.
Like higher education.
Yeah, higher
Colleges.
education.
It's like,
Yeah.
Lower education.
You know,
we
we-
need more
Lower-
plumbers.
Yes.
We need-
It's like-
Look at Bernathen. Bernathen used to be free.
I
The elementary school.
didn't that be free?
Because it was backed up by
I don't
founding.
think
Right,
it's ever been
right.
free in my
Yeah,
mom's
Robert.
lifetime, and she's 88.
Yeah.
The thing about education is, it doesn't have to be an expensive university. I mean, what the university gives you is the piece of paper. that gives you an into jobs.
Right.
But it's possible for people to take education into their own hands and create communities of mutually
But you
educational.
don't get the piece of paper.
You don't get the piece of paper.
Right.
But we're getting to the point where the piece of paper is out of reach for so many people. You know,
Well, and now many businesses are accepting certificates.
Oh, are they?
Yeah.
Oh,
There's
that's
a
good.
whole national system of certification of certificates.
mhm.
That's
For
good.
short courses, and primarily it's in the tech area, but it's in other areas. as well.
I've heard it said that higher education isn't for education. It's for ranking people, making sure that the top people stay on top.
Exactly.
It is.
The journeyman master program has its own problems too. I mean, there are problems in each system if you get anybody who's dictatorial or in love of dominion running them.
Mhm.
Every system can be
And love
corrupted.
of
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and
Capitalism, in its true form, is fine. It works.
yes, right.
It works for everyone's good. In its true form.
In its true form. It's uncorrupted form.
Mm-hmm.
So Marxism in its true form is heavenly.
Right.
It doesn't mean it works when anyone has opprobrium.
Yeah, right. It only works if everybody's
Yeah, so I've heard
angelic.
people say if people would only behave, society would work so much better.
Right.
But and what I want to know is how can we create a society that inspires people to live up to the best that's in them, that rewards them for behaving well.
Or that grows men up.
Right, that grows men
yeah.
up.
I think the concept that really is staying with me is that one. The one that problem is patriarchy is immature boys.
Yes.
The immature
So
ones.
who are the mature ones that we can look at as models?
Well, I
Here,
would
there, and everywhere.
I've always said that the most beautiful image of masculinity is a man you could leave a baby with.
Mhm.
You know, if you can run up to a man and dump a baby in his lap and run away, say, I have an emergency, and have no worries that that baby is going to be taken care of, whether he does it well or not. He's going to be trying his hardest and loving that child and, you know, taking care of the child while you're off on your emergency. That is a true man.
Yeah, well, I think there are some
that's good.
names.
Yeah.
I could name names. Nelson Mandela,
Yeah.
Mahatma Gandhi, Pope Francis. Well, and,
Well, name some happily married ones.
okay.
Gandhi was married.
He was married, happily married.
Okay.
So.
I think
Well,
Barack
Nelson-
Obama is that kind of person.
Michael was absolutely amazing with the grandbabies when they were brand new.
I know we have to wind up, but before we stop, I just want to say a couple things about literary influences. One of the first books I ever read was *The Secret Garden* by Frances Hodgson Burnett, and I also read her book *A Little Princess* and her book *Lost Prince*, and also *Little Lord Fauntleroy*. And I didn't realize at the time how her books were just full of colonialism, like the British Empire and all these and India and all that.
Right.
And it's like, and I was talking with Irene, my oldest, about *Secret Garden*, and Irene said, Dickon Sowerby is the noble savage. And I'm like, dang, it's so true. It's like, he's a lower class, he's a common war boy from a cottage, and he's like this mystical, like he plays his little pipe and the creatures come to him, and he's supposed to be this, like the noble savage, an uncorrupted, primitive person who has like bordering on magical powers, and he knows how to make the plants grow and all that.
Is he the one that's crippled?
He's not the one that's crippled.
The boy who teaches them how to weed the garden.
Oh, okay.
Right, the
I'm
guy
forgetting book a
who's
bit.
crippled is Colin.
Oh, okay. All right.
He's not the noble savage. He's not noble and he's not savage.
Okay. All right.
At least to
okay.
begin with,
You
right.
have to remind me of the book. But yeah. Okay.
So,
Okay.
but
So it's a noble person who is
It's like-
who is noble sa-
yeah, well, it was unspoiled by civilization. People were like, there was this trope of, you would go out and find these people who lived in harmony with nature, and maybe they didn't know how to read, and
What
so
do
they
the
had to
simple
grow up.
folk do out of Camelot, right?
What's that?
They're the simple folk in Camelot.
Mm-hmm. Right, the simple folk in Camelot, right. And so people would have this stereotype of the noble savage, aren't they wonderful? And they would meet real ones, and they would see them quarreling and drinking, and go, hey, they're not so noble, are they? I guess it's okay to oppress them. And like women are supposed to be the angels on a pedestal. And it's like, oh, they're not so perfect, are they? So I guess it's okay to oppress them. As Melanie would say, they fall off their pedestal and get walked on. So yeah. But then just yesterday morning, you guys, I was reading The Light Heart, which is one of the Williamsburg novels by Elsworth Bing. She wrote Dawn's Early Light, Yankee Stranger, Ever After, The Light Heart, and on there are 3 more. And these were the books that were on the 8th grade shelf. Like, they were special books for 8th graders to read. And you have to really watch out for them because they glorified slavery, maybe even more than Gone with the Wind. It's like, it wasn't until I read Caste by Isabel Wilkerson that it really hit me. Oh, slavery was terrible for pretty much everybody. And even people who lived in nice houses with kind owners, they were at best treated like children. They were not treated like adults. They were treated like pet animals or children. And it's like, and they couldn't depend on keeping their families together. Anyway, so yeah. And so in The Light Heart, I was reading, and this book was set in pre-Great War, and it was written in 1947. She had none of the usual stigmata of the unmarried career girl. She was not angular or brittle or aggressively self-sufficient. She expected to have doors open for her and chairs placed and things handed. She was utterly feminine and enjoyed being treated by infatuated males as though she was half-witted. And then later on, perhaps if Johnny had not asked, if he had not apologized, if Johnny had been the master and shown that he was, he could have had her then, for she was lonely and longing for love. But had I better go now, said Johnny, and lost her forever. I wish it was different, Johnny, she said, miserably. And what she meant was that she wished Johnny was different, with a hard, irresistible grip to him, not to be denied. And it's like a little bit, it's too close to rape culture for comfort. Now, it's only a few years ago that my daughters told me about rape culture and how it's like, there's this idea in literature that women really want to be dominated in the bedroom. And like, they can't say it. They can't say, I want you to rape me, but they really do want to be raped. And so when the man rapes them, he's doing what they want. So there's one more book that I haven't mentioned, and that is Whistleblower by Susan Fowler. It's about a woman who actually had to reconceptualize her career 3 different times, and she ended up at Uber, and she was sexually harassed over and over again. And after she actually went public with her complaints, she was stalked. Her family was threatened. It's like it was a bad scene. But it was like this is where we've come to with the Me Too movement. It's like finally women are standing up for themselves and saying, no, we don't want to be harassed anymore. Don't do this. And people, men in power, are saying, in effect, we should be allowed to do this.
At your own risk.
Right. So
Thank you,
this is
Linda.
yes, that's it, guys.
Thank
I
you.
wish